It's so good to have Avery and Kagan and Lori with us this morning singing. So good to have you guys here. And on keyboard, Justin Pate. Will you be with us for 2 Sundays? I don't know. Okay, I don't know. He may not come back after this Sunday. Lori, as you know, Lori Simmons, our regular keyboardist, and we call her the band mama, she is in Scotland. If some of y'all have been noticing on Facebook, she's in Scotland and really enjoying her time there. So this song, Imagine, I really like this idea of imagine. It's a what-if kind of thing. It's what if the world didn't have all of this divisiveness, didn't have this division. What if the world was living as one? What if there were no hunger? What if there were no greed? And last week I shared with you this idea that what keeps us from living sort of this resurrected life, the practicing resurrection, is often we get trapped in this cocoon. We're stuck in this cocoon. But what holds us there, I mentioned these 4 dualities, and I'll put them back up here again. Let's see. We'll just leave that there for the moment. These 4 dualities, and they are, let's see, success and failure, and these dualities are basically sort of Western ideas that we live by. It's what we grew up with. They're our social norms. I call them our defaults. They're basically our emotional defaults. It's where we often go one way or the other on either side of this. Let's see, not necessarily in any order. Praise and blame. Let's see, pleasure and pain. And then the 4th one is, let's see if I can, fame and shame. These, I mean, you can recognize these. In fact, if you just thought about them casually, you can imagine yourself at any time in your life, perhaps, where you felt on one side or the other. If not your own self-narrative, you've certainly felt this from somebody else. This idea of sort of being judged as one of the other, or judging your own actions because of what's kind of expected. And today, what I want to spend time on is this idea of success and failure. And in particular, this is the idea of failing to succeed. And what I want you to think about is, because we often think of that in the negative as though, well, that person just couldn't get it together. That person failed to succeed. I want you to think of it in the positive, as indeed that's exactly what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to fail to succeed. And that's what this text is all about. So tell me about success. What are measures of success? Just start throwing out some ideas. What do we mean when we say
money, money, money?
Money, money, money. Okay. Why didn't we do that song? That's a good song. Okay. Money. All right. What else do we mean by success? Power. Y'all just shout them out. I may not hear them all because I'm hearing multiple times, but I'll just keep going. What'd you say? Position, prestige. Success is happiness? Okay. Yeah. Prestige, power. Oh, we already said that. What was the other one? Oh, position. And I'm sorry if you can't read these way back in the back. What, way back in the back, I heard something?
Mini Cooper.
Judge not lest ye be judged. 1960s Volkswagen dude. Okay, I'll put it up here. I'm not ashamed, though I might start feeling that way. Okay. Tom has a Mini Cooper. Okay, what else? What else? Yes, in the back?
I said love.
Love. All right, success is love. Okay. All right, so maybe one more here. Anything else? Winning. Winning, yes. It became the phrase. When was that the word for, what was that, 2002 or something? 1,000? Only 1,000? Okay. Thousands. of Facebook likes, of course. Oh my gosh. I just said having a good day. I raced back to see how many people liked it. A promotion. Yeah, okay, success is promotion. Yeah. All right. Now I'm going to have to go erase these on the other side here and tell me about, obviously failure, we could simply say the opposite of all of these. But let's get a little imaginative and think of ways in which we think of failure, okay? Divorce, all right. What else? What? One Facebook. Only one like. Oh my gosh, that would be depressing, wouldn't it? What? What? Self-esteem? Oh, like low self-esteem. Lack of, okay. Lack of. I'm just going to put AC, okay. Bankruptcy, depression, job loss. Aging. We can say poorly, but I think what you mean is that we are aging, not in terms of poor health, but we're just not aging poorly. Okay, right. Even dying. Dying is even, what an odd and ironic failure. But you're right. Yeah. Okay, oh my God. So a moral mistake. Or simply losing. Yes, okay. Well, that's great. So all of these, again, are things which you have either experienced, have found yourself in the midst of, maybe now, certainly know people, certainly understand these as ways in which we identify ourselves on one side or the other. We grow up in this cultural awareness of we are measured. And oftentimes we buy into it, wholeheartedly. Ironically, again, it's not very much wholehearted living. It tends to be quite limited sort of living and approach to life. And yet we buy it hook, line, and sinker. So I want to think with you about these ideas of what it means. My grandmother saw in me great potential. I've talked about my grandmother, the opera singer. She got me lined up for guitar lessons with John Giordano. Some of you all remember John, Giordano was the symphony director for so many years. And I took one lesson, and then he told my grandmother I didn't have any hope. And it wasn't because I wasn't capable, it's because I just didn't have that passion. I just didn't have that connection to music in that way. And so, as many of you knew, I took up the ukulele eventually. And I'm not sure where that falls in the success-failure measure. But my grandfather, on the other hand, saw me. He was a surgeon, a very prominent surgeon in Fort Worth, and he saw me as being a surgeon. I was kind of his... He sort of saw me as the possible one, the one with the kind heart, the middle child, the one that would be a great doctor, and tried to get me interested in that. Bought me a number of times. Bought me one of those chemistry sets. I forget the company. Gilbert, I think, was the company that made them. Chemcraft was another one, and of course, it never happened because I took chemistry and failed it in college twice. Where would that be up here on this failing and succeeding line, So I think it's very easy to find ourselves, when I was I'm still ordained ministry, but when I served in local church as a pastor of my own church, there's this amazing sort of challenge because by the time I got into ministry, I pursued ministry because I was curious, because I was interested in discovering the connections of where we find God in our midst. I was coming out of that fundamentalist evangelical sort of adolescence and young adulthood and sort of trying to find my way of connecting. How do we connect to the sacred in our midst? And seminary seemed like a good path, particularly because of my interest in counseling, and Bright Divinity had a great program there. But what happened immediately, as soon as I pursued that track of ordination, my future was already being predicted. My future was already being determined, and everyone around me supported that. Well, so when are you going to take your own church? When are you going to have your own appointment? I mean, you're serving as associate at all these places. When are you going to have your own church? I mean, clearly you want to have a church and then move up that church ladder. The bigger churches, eventually, the more prominent kinds of churches, you know. They would say, I can see you there. And so I bought into that. And after I took my own church out south of Dallas, a pretty nice sort of suburban, it was a friendly sort of white flight community, you know. To be honest, it was sort of one of those communities where everybody was getting out of the chaos and the tensions and the racial tensions of South Dallas. It was a very challenging community to be in. And so as I served that church, I was already at odds because of sort of my progressive nature. But not only that, something else was happening. As I was speaking, I began to remember that time that my uncle tried to get me into track. And when I would run track, what kept me going was every time the gun would go off, I would just run. And after racing in 9th grade, I began to think, why am I running? I hate track. And I began to realize that I wasn't in the right place in that pulpit. It wasn't in that setting. It wasn't right. It was feeling odd. It was like I was saying, who is this that's standing here? What am I doing here? Our text this morning, Jesus says essentially, I know why I'm here. This is why I'm here. I was saying, I don't know. Why am I here? What am I doing? And so I moved out of that and I went into traveling around and touring as a storyteller and as a musician. Maybe you've had similar struggles with this idea of being on the right track, with this idea of being maybe in the wrong place. We live by this sense of that success is about reaching a certain destination, and that those destinations that society deems are particularly meaningful. Not just any destination. She's a doctor. He's a great senior minister. She's got one of these large churches. She's doing wonderfully. He's an amazing actor in Hollywood. Her book just sold 100,000 copies. Success is measured by not just money, but by prestige, by how far you've moved along sort of this ladder, how much you've acquired or attained. It's an understandable reality. And I'm not saying necessarily that we need to dismiss that. But I am saying that when we get caught in these polarities, in these dualisms, something else isn't allowed to happen. We're no longer present to what's really going on in our midst. Martin Buber wrote about it this way. Martin Buber said, if we had power over the ends of the earth, it would not give us that fulfillment of existence which a quiet, devoted relationship to nearby life can give us. I'm going to read it again because I think it's pretty profound. If we had power over the ends of the earth, it would still not give us that fulfillment of existence which a quiet, devoted relationship to nearby life can give us. Success centers around what we value and what we aim for. We set goals. We try to reach those goals. And failure would be to miss the mark. You remember the old story that I was told that the rabbi once told me when I was going up to look at graduate school at Boston University and met him at the subway station. He was asking me why I was there, and I was saying, well, I'm not exactly sure. I'm kind of looking around. And he says, so you're going places, but you're not sure where you're going? And I said, well, not exactly. He says, well, then what exactly? And, you know, a good rabbi doesn't answer a question. He just keeps asking questions. And so he kept asking, and then finally told me the story of the archer that was seeking the finest archer in the world to outdo him because he was such a master at his skill, and finally saw these targets with bullseyes in them out in the field on these trees. And when he went around the hedge, he saw a small child shooting the arrows. Some of you remember this one. And when he went up to this small child and asked him how in the world a small child, 10 years old, could shoot all these perfect targets, and the kid said, it's easy. I shoot the arrow, then draw a circle around wherever it hits. Is that the same thing as aiming high? Is that the same thing as aiming for success? Or is that just copping out and taking whatever life gives you and saying, that's exactly what I was shooting for? We have trouble trying to figure out exactly what it is that we're meant to do here, but we end up defaulting. We always end up defaulting to one of these, to success and failure. In fact, all four of those sort of polar realities are what we default to. Some of it's cultural, some of it's biological. It's part of our nature in the sense of fear. And yet what Martin Buber is suggesting, and what Jesus is suggesting, I think, is this idea that by letting things fall away, like a grain, like a seed, by letting things fall away a little bit, perhaps we're allowed to be more present, to living more genuinely, maybe more vulnerably, but certainly more openly and wholeheartedly, as some would say, to what's happening in the moment. Imagine this idea, what does it mean to live to what's nearby, to life that's nearby? You can say it. I mean, you're on your deathbed, you're not going to be going like, I wish I'd gotten the new Mini Cooper. You're not going to say it. And I'm already hating mine. I mean, I'm already not hating it, but I'm already going like, it's just a car. I mean, I'm being silly, of course, but the reality is you'll find yourself, it's the relationships. And maybe not even the relationships with people. It's the quiet moments you loved spending in the garden. Linda and I went for a walk at Botanic Garden on Saturday. I mean, we're so fortunate to have this amazing backyard in our neighborhood. And we just went walking, and there were pockets of people everywhere just digging, and just being present to the soil. And as we walked over past the broccoli, because we're trying to grow broccoli in our backyard, and it's not working too well. But so we go past it, and one of the folks there, I forget her name, but she's a member here in the church, goes to the sanctuary worship. She comes up and she says, "Isn't it wonderful?" And then says, "Come here," and we lean in and we look at this plant. And she has a relationship with this plant, with all of the plants, with the earth. It's how do we live close to something, what's nearby? We have to let go. We have to let these things fall away from us. And it's challenging because our default is to go to success or failure. It's just where we go. Our biology is based in fear, and that fear is oftentimes at the root of shame and guilt and blame. And Jesus says to his disciples this text, he says, "Listen carefully. Unless a grain of wheat is buried in the ground, dead to the world, it's never anything more than a grain of wheat. But if it's buried, it sprouts, it reproduces itself many times over. And in the same way, anyone who holds on to life as it is destroys that life. But if you were to let go, if you were to be reckless in your love, as Martin Buber said, if you were to be present to what life is nearby, then you would find this wider connection. You'll have life eternal, as it said in the text. You'll have it real. I love that word that Eugene Peterson uses there in his interpretation. You'll have it real. What does it mean to have real life? And I think that's what we're trying to ultimately do as we seek to be resurrected here and now, as well as whatever may happen in the afterlife, or whatever happens once we die. But here and now, how does the kingdom come together? How does the kingdom come together? It comes together when we begin to be present to real life. The Latin root for, it's interesting, the Latin root for success is what follows close after. I like that. The Latin root is for what follows, what succeeds, what follows close after. It's interesting, the Latin root for failure is to trip, or to cause to fall, or to come to an end and cease to exist. And so the gospel text has this strange, paradoxical, and if you realize it, if you really think of it, even humorous sort of play on words that Jesus is giving to his listeners. He says, if you really want to experience life deeply, then you got to die. You got to fall, you got to fail. And you have to do it over and over. So I don't want to suggest that we shouldn't try to achieve, or that we shouldn't work towards goals, or that it's not right for us to have stuff by any means. I wouldn't want to suggest that. What I do want to suggest is that we learn how to move past these defaults of going to either failure or success, of measuring each other by failure or success. I wrote in my blog post this past week this story. Don't know how many of you read it, but the story of the cyclist. And he trained for this Tour de France kind of race. And he was an amazing cyclist, shaved his body so that he was streamlined, so that he could move faster through the air, trained exhaustively for this thing. And then when the race began, after training for years, he's just moving ahead of everyone. He's gone so far ahead of everyone, can't see the next person behind him, so far ahead of them he is. And he's coming up over a hill, just moving up that hill like he's just barely working at it. And as he crests over the top of the hill, about to coast down, build up speed, a huge blue heron just flies up from the ground in front of him, stops him dead. He slams on his brakes. The heron's wide wingspan begins to take off, and he's staring as he straddles his bike. This blue heron begins to fly off, and the other bicyclists race past him. And then years later, as the story goes, when someone asked him, how was it that you lost that race? What was the thing that really made you lose that race? He was quick to respond and say, I didn't lose it. I left it. That's the challenge, I think, what it means to sort of finally move past that first stage of our spirituality, that first half, is to begin to realize when we feel these judgments coming on, whether it's ourselves or whether it's someone else, to stop, to be present, to just let it go, and to begin to ask ourselves, what does it really mean here? What am I really missing here? What's in front of me right this moment? What blue heron is seeking to sort of be noticed right now? I think that's the challenge for us. Now, the skeptic would say, yeah, but he still lost. He still lost the race. But a person of soul might say, Jesus might say, that's what he was preparing for all along. All of that training was so that he'd see the blue heron when it did leap up. How to be present in what we do with that mind also that says, there is sacredness, God is present, Christ is present in all these things. I want to make sure I don't miss that. So we learn to let go. I want to close with just this idea. I was at the mission, and band, y'all can come on up here, by the way. Y'all can come on up here. We can move that aside. Thank you very much, Sharm. I was at the mission this last week. I don't go there often enough. You know, we have this beautiful, amazing church mission over here that's on Henderson, corner of Henderson and I think First Street. Yeah. I was thinking that was Weatherford or Belknap, but yeah, First Street. And it's just this amazing. We always think of it as, you know, it does food, it does clothing. It does so much more. It does so much more. I wasn't aware. I spent 2 hours there just kind of helping. I was there. I was asked to come and just kind of open up with a prayer as the volunteers came. A lot of volunteers. Some of you people in here are volunteers over there at the mission. And it just was amazing, the folks that were there. But I stayed. I stayed for 2 hours and just found myself kind of at the door greeting people as they came in. Not only is it food and clothing, but Catholic Charities is there, JPS is there. There's a number of services that are provided to try to help people get what they need, but also reconnect. And maybe even more than that, to feel a sense of worth, to feel a sense of value. And so when people come and go, there's just greeting, there's conversation. It's an humbling experience, but I think, in a way, it's a total, absolute failure. If you think in terms of culture today, if you think in terms of our default, Jesus' ministry, what we do here at the church, what you may do in your volunteers, it's an absolute, utter failure. You're never going to get rid of it. No matter how hard we try, we'll never get rid of poverty. No matter how hard we'll try, we'll never have every person fed. Imagine will never actually happen. It's not just, it's a dream. And I know we want it to happen, but it won't happen. If you're going to measure yourself by this default, stop now. Quit. It ain't going to happen. So the question is, why didn't Jesus quit? Because the main default, the way to break out of the cocoon, is to stop measuring by these definitions, these dualities, but instead to simply show up. Just be present and allow what's happening in that moment to begin to change. So that what happens is maybe the dreams don't come true. Maybe the imagined visions don't come true. But in the process, you do.